Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Outta Savannah, Talking with Tammi. My guest, Carolyn V Hamilton, is here. We are going to have a wonderful time today. Thank you so much for joining us. Carolyn, share with the people who you are and what it is that you do.
First of all, Tammi, thanks so much for inviting me to do this, because I just think that, I love the phrase that you had, unleashing your true self.
Yes.
And I can really relate to that.
Yes.
So, where do I start? I'm an author and a watercolor artist, and I am of a certain age. So I'm technically retired, but not really, because when you are a creative person, you never retire. You retire, you stop creating and you die. That's it. And we all are all creative people. So I'm a big believer in just keep going and keep creating. And that's what I've been doing for the last full-time for the last 10 years, since I emigrated from the United States to Ecuador. And I don't remember now how many books I published. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say 6 novels and about 5 nonfiction books for writers, specifically memoir writers, and 3 adult coloring books. And I'm currently working on a new adult coloring book and a new book for memoir writers called 99 Writing Prompts for Memoir Writers and Journal Writers Who Are Stuck.
Oh, nice.
So those are going to be my next publications. And since I started a Facebook group it's called Aspiring Memoir Writers, and I started it about 4 or 5 years ago. And I have over 1,700 people in that group, and they are so interactive and so supportive and so much fun. And so I manage that group, and I'm currently in the middle of teaching an 8-week course online called Memoir to Legacy 101. And it's about how to get started and how to get your first draft of at least 42,000 words completed in 8 weeks. And that's my first online course. I'm working now on a follow-up called Memoir to Legacy 201, Edit Like a Pro. And then I'm going into 3rd and 4th versions on publishing and then marketing your memoir. So that's my focus right now.
That's nice.
The way I got into this was that I had a bunch of funny stories that I'd thrown into files for years, from the 3 years that I worked as a cocktail waitress at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas in the 1970s. So and my intention was to just write a book of sharing funny stories that happened. And I called it Coming to Las Vegas, a True Tale of Sex, Drugs, and Sin City in the 70s. And to my surprise, there were serious parts in it too, but the book became #1 in Amazon's category Gender Studies and LBGTQ Studies.
Wow.
I have no idea. And then it went on to become #1 in their category, something called Employees in the Workplace. So that book has really kind of put me on the map and got me going. It wasn't the first book I wrote. The first book I wrote was a fiction called Elizabeth Sampson, Forbidden Bride. And it was based on the true story of the first Black woman in Suriname, a South American country, formerly Dutch Guyana. And she was in the 18th century, she was the first Black woman to get legal permission from the Dutch government to marry white. And this was a big deal in the country's history. Yeah. So that was my first novel. And that was an amazing experience because I learned a lot about writing. I bought tons of writing books and went to conferences and all kinds of stuff. And I still love that book because because it was my first, but also it was a very interesting writing experience because at first I was going to write a romance because I thought romance sells. And then I thought, no, this story is too serious to be some kind of frivolous romance set in, 2 centuries ago. So then I was going to write it as a third person, tell the stories third person. And as I got into more and more research about the history of the country, and there are so many letters and ship manifests and diaries and journals that people kept that are so fascinating to read. And that's why I really encourage my memoir writers to write their story. Don't worry about, is it important, who's going to care? Because 100 years from now, these are the things that people will read to understand what life was like today. And that's why we read histories and letters and journals from people like George Washington and yama, yama, yama. But
so
anyway.
What made you decide to write her story?
Well, I was living in Suriname. I had been sent there for 2 years with the Peace Corps. And Elizabeth Sampson is part of their cultural history. She's a very important person there. And her story is really fascinating because it took her, she fought the government for 50 years to get this permission. She was very wealthy, a plantation owner. And plantation owners kept all their own journals and stuff too, just like farmers do. And she had everything money could buy. She lived a luxurious, wealthy life. She had over 200 slaves. And so when people tell me, oh, Black people never had slaves, and oh, Jewish people never had slaves, like, oh God, they don't know anything about history.
Everybody had slaves.
History is not, slavery has never been about color. Only in the United States have they made it about color. Everywhere else in history, there have been slaves, and it had nothing to do with what color they were. It's about power over another group of people. That's all it is. Anyway, so back to Elizabeth Sampson. So the only thing she wanted to be married. She was a religious woman, and she loved this man who was a white captain in the Dutch army and military, and they wanted to marry. And the law said that you couldn't mix the race. Now, the Dutch were the original creators of the paper trail, I think. And they had all these statuses of according to what percentage of Black blood you had in you. Okay. And then they had all these names for these percentages. Who could keep track of all this? Exactly. It's so socially crazy. But if you were 100% Negro, if you were 90% Negro, you could marry white. But if you were 100% Negro, you couldn't. And that's what she was fighting. And it has an amazing ending, which I'm not going to tell here. But
no, because I'm going to read that book.
But let me tell you what happened. And what I started to say about this was, as I'm researching and everything, and I start to write this story, I get this, no, this isn't working thing. And then it became a first person account of her life told through journals. And in the preface of it, I preface about how I was a researcher in the country and I found these journals in the museum. And people actually think I did find journals, but that's part of the fiction anyway. And then I went in, and as I wrote this voice came to me. Now, I'm not an airy fairy person, but it was like this voice came to me over my shoulder. And I started to write this in a first person thing with the voice of the time and her voice. And and that's how it came out, was a first person diary entry story. Oh, nice. And I really thought, when I was marketing that book, I really thought people would say, well, how can you as a white woman write a first person account of a Black woman. Excuse me. And
And people say that.
Yeah, but nobody asked me that. Nobody ever asked me that.
That's cool.
They were more concerned with, did the Jewish people have slaves? And I mean, it was so crazy. But anyway, so that was my first novel. And then I can't remember if I wrote the memoir next or if I did ultimately write the romance, a different book next. But anyway, that's how I got started on this trail. And I started to interact more with memoir writers. And they, speaking of unleashing your true self, this is a challenge for a lot of people to write personal stories, especially when there have been really painful things like family incest and rape and all this stuff. It's really hard for a lot of people to write about that.
I have knowledge because I did that. I wrote my story, and it was very difficult.
Yeah. What's the name of the book?
It's called.
Have you
Walking
published
Away.
it yet? Oh, you have published it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Okay. I definitely want to read it. Well, you know then what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And then the second thing that happened was when we were speaking earlier, I mentioned that I got divorced from my third husband and feeling like just a terrible failure as a woman. Because I couldn't all by myself personally, I couldn't make 3 marriages work. So I must be really a bad woman, a stupid woman, a woman with no talents and skills whatsoever. I mean, I just felt terrible. But I was also very angry because my third husband was a comedian, and there's a very fine line between comedy and verbal abuse, comedy and cruelty. And I looked around, and there's a lot of books on physical abuse. That's not what I'm talking about. We know that what you say to your children now affects their self-esteem. We know that what you say in the workplace affects a person's work performance. And we no longer excuse bad behavior by saying, oh, he didn't really mean it, he was drunk. But there's not much out there about verbal and emotional abuse and how that destroys a relationship.
Yes.
So I couldn't write it because I was so angry and pissed off. And that's not the time to make any decisions at all, especially not about writing a memoir. So again, I threw notes in a drawer, and several years later, I did publish the book, and I called it Help, I Married a Comedian. I called it Help, I Married an Alien, with alien crossed out on the cover and the word comedian. And then it's like a 30-year life in the circus lane of marriage to a stand-up comedian, because there were some funny and some good times. So I wanted to make sure that there was a balance in there between the point I wanted to make and the fact that, I stayed for 30 years. So it wasn't all bad.
Right.
And how we handled that and what we learned from it. And it's real. So anyway, the ex-husband read the book, and he said, oh, you shouldn't have called it Help, I Married a Comedian. You should have called it Help, I Married an Asshole. It's like, well, he's an asshole, but he's my asshole.
Yes.
And so, he's not upset or anything, but I thought that was an interesting observation.
Oh, yes.
I said, you know what? I tell the stories and let the reader decide if they think that or not.
Yes.
So that was a pretty long-winded version of who I am and where I got to be and what I'm doing now.
Yes. And you know what I want to ask? I want to ask how did you get there? Like, did you decide when you were young that you wanted to write, or was it something that, came to you as you lived, or how did that work?
Well, like my massive financial retirement, none of that was planned. I bopped through life having adventures. When I was a kid, the one thing, well, I grew up in the 50s, and a woman was expected to get married, but she might be a teacher or a nurse or a secretary or maybe a stewardess before she got married, something to fall back on if your husband left you. But certainly she didn't go out and become a Playboy bunny, which I did, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, like, oh, that sounds like fun.
Interesting.
And my parents were working class people. My father was a laundry truck driver. My mother didn't work. So they made it clear there's no money for college. You're going to have to, when you graduate from high school, you're going to have to figure it out yourself or go get a job. And when I was little, I developed, I could copy things. I discovered I had this drawing ability where I could copy things. And I would take these things to my mother and say, look what I drew. And she'd say, did that come out of your head or did you copy it? Like that was some bad thing. But these were people this was another time. And these were people who were good parents, and we had a great family life, but they didn't know anything about nurturing creativity. They didn't know it. All they saw was starving artist. So there was never any encouragement for me to go forward and do that. In high school, I fell in love with creative writing, and I loved that class, and I loved the teacher, and I took it twice because why not? It was so much fun. And I still have my notebook from that class.
Wow.
And going back through it the other day, and all the things that I learned about writing and storytelling since then were in that book. I just hadn't looked at it for 40 years. And so that's been kind of a fun surprise. Again, there was no encouragement to make a living as a writer because, I mean, my teacher was a teacher. She didn't know anything about making a living as a journalist or a writer for a magazine in New York or anything like that, really. And so there was never any encouragement to pursue those kinds of creative careers. In fact, I had two guys from my high school class who went on to become actors, and we've had this conversation, nobody encouraged them either. They just fell into it.
Yes.
So I did what you're supposed to do. I got married and we moved to LA, and I discovered the California junior college system. You only had to pay for books.
Nice.
And thank you to my first husband who supported me while I went through 2 years of commercial art school. That's what they called it before graphic design. And I went through 2 years of commercial art school at Los Angeles Trade Technical College, which was part of the junior college system. So I got a legitimate AA degree. And I only had to take the basic courses because it was a trade school. And then everything else was about art. It was wonderful. That propelled me into the world of advertising, the world of Mad Men. So then I spent 30 years in the world of Mad Men.
Gotcha.
And I have been thinking about writing a memoir about those stories too, because they were pretty crazy, but I don't know.
I can imagine that'd be interesting.
Well, I don't know. It might be, but it was just a crazy, sometimes I think I should have gone on. I think, why didn't I get into something helpful and good for society, like being a nurse? I thought this, actually, I should have been a nurse and just an artwork on the side. And it would have been a more, I don't know, legitimate life, if you will. I don't know what my thinking is there, but
it would have sucked your soul.
But I think I'd probably I'd have a better Social Security income, I think. But anyway,
There's that.
yeah, there's that. And yet it's okay, because I knew at an early age that I wanted to have adventures. I didn't even know what that meant, but I looked at the idea of motherhood and children, and I assumed you'd have children. That's just something you do.
Mhm.
And I had girlfriends who just couldn't wait to be mothers, and I was never that. My mother wanted me to, I was an only child, so I got mixed messages.
Oh, wow.
She wanted me to go out and have adventures because she had health issues and had never been able to do that. So she wanted me to go have adventures. And then on the other hand, she couldn't wait to have grandchildren. Well, the two kind of don't go too much together. But and my first husband, fortunately, was scared of being a father. We didn't talk about it, but we talk about it in later years. And that's why we never had children. He came, we got married, and he said, okay, he says, here's the deal. He said, you have three choices. I'm 19. What do I know? Please your husband, right?
Mhm.
He says, you have three choices. You can go to school, go to university and get a degree, or you can have a baby, or you can work, and those, but you can't sit home and eat bonbons and watch television. That's not acceptable. Okay. And he says, now, if you choose to work, talk about propaganda. If you choose to work, you can, I sewed. He says, you can have all those pretty cocktail dresses out of all that gorgeous material you love in the fabric stores. You can have, we can travel, we can go to all the concerts, we can go see Ella Fitzgerald and all the, and the Kingston Trio and Joan Baez, and we can go to all the concerts and travel and eat out. And did I mention you can have all those cocktail dresses? And so, man, I'm right there. I'm working. I'm getting a job.
Right.
And so that's what I did. And that's what we did for the 5 years of our marriage.
Okay.
So anyway, it's none of it was planned. I mean, I just bopped from one fun thing to another. And then how I came to Las Vegas was was divorced from the first husband, and I'm bopping around LA working in advertising and going to discos at night and not taking much of anything seriously. And I met this guy who was a little older, and he was a soldier of fortune. Well, adventures. And so he said, come with me to Las Vegas. I have friends there who are circus people, and they are ending a 5-year contract at Circus, and they want to go on the road with their own circus business. And they want me to be their general manager, and I'll introduce you and you can be their publicity director. And I went, oh, well, go move to Vegas, join a circus. Why not? What fun.
Yes.
We're not talking serious career planning here.
Mhm. Right. You're talking fun.
Yeah, fun. And so that's what I did. And anyway, after 6 months there, the circus kind of fell apart. I write about this actually in my first Coming to Las Vegas. I tell how it fell apart and we're broke, and now we got to go get jobs and go to work so we can get enough money to get back to LA, because Vegas was this dry desert, tumbleweed place in the desert. No one in their right mind would want to live there. It was 175,000 people after LA. Talk about culture shock. And even then in 1973, 74, something like that, they were saying, oh, the Colorado River's drying up and there won't be any water. And what are we going to do? This valley will never support 500,000 people. And today it's like 3 million, I think.
Mhm. And people are actually moving there.
Yes, they're crazy. But anyway.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was fun. The years that I was there, ended up being there about 38 years, I think. So I grew with the town, or the town grew with me, however you want to look at it. But again, none of it was planned. It was all, well, that sounds like fun.
Mhm.
And so my curiosity, I think, is what I don't know if there's a correlation between curiosity and creativity, but if it was something new and fun and looked interesting, I wanted to know more.
Yep. I think it is a correlation between that. So let's talk about your memoirs, because we're going to have to wrap it
I
up.
haven't talked enough about them.
No, I wanted you to share, just a little bit about, the ones that you've written now, your memoirs that you're promoting.
Well, like I said, coming to Las Vegas covers the first 3 years I was in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the time that I worked at the MGM Grand, which had just opened and was the hottest new thing in the country, biggest hotel casino in the world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very exciting.
Nice.
So, but the story really ended like when I quit the job, because as I said, I just really wanted to share all the funny stories that happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was never my intention to make a social statement, but it kind of turned out like that, I guess. And,
Right.
and then I never thought about writing another memoir until after my third divorce. And I think I used to say I'm genre conflicted, because I couldn't decide whether to write romance, whether to write mysteries, whether to write sci-fi.
Right.
But I have crossed sci-fi off the table.
Right.
And probably romance. I don't think I'll write another romance. Romance readers are really picky. They want certain things in a certain way, and I don't want to be that constricted. So I wrote three mysteries. The first one was Magicide. And the way these books came to me was just, reading the newspapers, watching the news.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get ideas. Years and years ago, I heard an interview with a woman who wrote 80% of the daytime soap operas in Hollywood. And she said, I get my ideas from reading small town newspapers. She says, I go to the library and look for small town newspapers. She says, anybody who thinks these things don't really happen, the things she wrote about on Guiding Light and Days of Our Lives. And all that.
Yes.
She said, anybody who thinks these things don't really happen doesn't read the newspapers.
Wow.
So anyway, Magicide came about because my comedy husband knew a lot of magicians. He had a lot of magician friends. And so I would be lucky enough to sit around some days and just listen to these guys gossip and talk. And, you just pick up stuff by listening. And so that's how I got the idea for Magicide. Was I took, this rumor and that rumor and that rumor and put them all together in a book.
Nice.
Yeah. And I was really lucky to have Johnny Thompson, a guy, he's passed now, but he was like the magician's magician. He was a consultant to Lance Burton and Siegfried and Roy and all these television specials and everything. And anyway, he helped me with a lot of the technical details. So that was really
nice.
And he read the book and said, because I wanted to say, well, am I saying this right without giving away too much information? And does this make sense? And so he was wonderful in helping me with that. And then the second one I wrote was called Implosion, because we had all these implosions in Las Vegas. The hotel is, what time is it now? Blow it up. It's old. And so I got this idea and I wrote this story, Implosion, about $6 million that's hidden in the hotel.
Oh, wow.
And hasn't been found, and it's going to be, destroyed. And then all the characters in the book are people I've known or met. And then after that, then the one I wrote last year is called Plan to Kill, and I had that kind of in the drawer for a long time, and that's about 4 businesswomen in Las Vegas who plot to kill the president of the United States after Roe v. Wade is overturned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very appropriate.
Well, so I debuted it on November 1st,
My birthday.
3 days before Election Day. And I thought, and the funny part about it was, some people read it and said, oh, that's, you're writing about Trump and Melania and everything. And no, I wrote this outline 10 years ago.
Right.
Before any of this happened. So it has nothing to do with President Trump and Melania. But interestingly enough, I wanted to run promos on Facebook, and they wouldn't accept any of my ads.
What?
Because during the weeks that led up to the election, Facebook was paranoid about conspiracy theories and plots and anything that had to do with politics. They were just paranoid about it.
Yes.
And they shut off people's accounts, and they just did all kinds of stuff. And so they looked at my ads that had the words "plan to kill" in the title and went, oh, no, can't run.
We're not doing that.
We're not taking her money.
No. That's crazy.
So there you go. Yeah.
All right.
So it just, what I decide to do next just comes from, which, if I don't have a hot new idea that I'm excited about, what old ideas do I have that I could get excited about? So that's kind of how it goes. I don't have a schedule of when I'm going to publish what. It just flows. Yeah. It's whatever looks like the most fun next.
That's the way I feel, because I'm like you. I'm writing a book now about my grandmother, and it's called Passing the Pearls. And so and I'm kind of just kind of letting it flow, because I've wanted to do one for years. She was my biggest, she was my person. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to write one for years. And so I started thinking about it one day, and I said, you know what, I'm going to write this. And then I got that idea of passing the pearls because that's what I feel like she did.
And that's what women do.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay. And so my goal is to have it finished before the end of the year, because I really, I've been working on it. I did my outline and all that. And so I was like, okay, I got that. And then I had another idea.
Word count. What's your word count right now?
I don't know.
Oh,
I don't even flow like that. Because you know what? This book that I just showed you, I wrote it in 30 days. I just sat down and I just started writing. I got it outline, and I just started writing. And I noticed, for me, that's usually how I do. Like, when I have the inspiration, I sit down, I write, and then, and then I go back and look at it, and then I go and get it edited and all that stuff. But I that's how I have to do. I was like, for me, that works for me. A lot of people are like, well, write so many words a day. I was like, but I don't write every day, because every day I don't feel like it. So I'm like, no, I can do it this way. All right. So
you can finish this book by the end of the year. No problem. You've got 3 more months.
Oh yeah. I'll probably finish it by the end of the month, really. But, I just give myself that grace and that leverage so I don't put pressure.
Yeah. Well, let me know and keep me in mind if you would like a beta reader.
I sure definitely will. Definitely will. So let's wrap up. Do you have any advice for anybody that is looking to pursue any type of creative, thing, even as we get older? Because I noticed that nowadays, a lot of people are pursuing things like after their career, like after they've done a teacher or whatever they've done, now they want to have a second act. They want to do something else. They want to write, they want to paint, they want to, be an intuitive or whatever it is they want to do. Do you have any advice for them? That might help, something maybe that somebody.
For writers, I used to say, keep writing and don't quit your day job.
Yes.
But for people in the situation that you're describing, I would say, open your mind to the most crazy, outrageous, possibilities, things that you think, oh, I could never do that. Oh, my mother wouldn't approve, what my children wouldn't approve. Open your mind to all those crazy ideas, and that way you'll feel freer when you find something that really pulls your strings. And the other thing is, be willing to let go. So in fact, I should write this down for me. Open your mind and be willing to let go. Because years ago, I had a guy when I was young, and he was traveling all over the place. And I met this guy in Vegas, and he said, through a job, and he said, he had just come back from Japan. And I said, oh God, I'd love to travel. I'd love to live in a foreign country. And he said, well, you can't do that if you're emotionally attached to your dining room furniture. And I blew that off, but I never forgot it. And it's true. You can't travel when you're loaded down. You can't travel through life or the world or anywhere if you're loaded down with a ton of baggage. And so for people in our age group who are looking to have a new adventure or you have to let go of some things. And that may mean that you say goodbye to the grandbabies who are only 3 months old and don't even know who you are, and come back when you're 13 and more interesting to talk to. And or you let go of this big house that you have really worked your life. That doesn't mean sell it. Maybe you just rent it and live on the difference. Or maybe you do sell it, and then now you're free of the baggage of it if the water pipes burst. But it's like space. Like scientists talk about space as a vacuum, and there's, maybe that's a bad analogy. Let me go to the stomach analogy. That's easier. I've read that the stomach is as big as your fist. Your stomach is the size of your fist. Mm-hmm. So you shouldn't eat anything more at one meal that is bigger than your fist.
Yes.
In volume. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't eat rice, because I'm looking at the other good things and thinking on the plate and thinking I'd rather have more of that and not waste that space with rice.
Yes, I agree.
And so that's, I think you have to make room for what you want in your life.
I agree because I actually did that. Spirit told me it was time for me to leave where I was at. I was in South Carolina, and I just packed my car down and drove to Arizona, where I had one cousin that said, you can stay with me. So I went to stay with her. No job.
Yeah. Free sleeps. That's good.
I just took a leap. I said, you know what? This is what I need to do right now. I had my kids, they were grown. I sat them down and I said, listen, mama's leaving.
I know. And they freaked out, right?
No, actually, my kids are really, what is the word? They're really woo-woo. So they kind of flow too. And to be honest, every single one of them left South Carolina after I did. And they all told me they were planning to go. So they're like, Ma, and I said, well, you could come with me if you want. They're like, no. So I did that. I left everything I knew and everybody I knew. And I was like, I got to go. It's time for me to go. Lost a lot of friends because people said, God wouldn't do that. God wouldn't say, just go and you don't have a job and you don't know nobody. I was like, yeah, he would.
Well, yeah.
So I understand.
Especially as a nurse, you can get a job anywhere.
Oh yeah.
I know it sounds like you may think you're a little burned out right now.
A little.
But let me tell you, there are organizations that will pay you to go to other countries to help out in a medical capacity. You can explore this on the internet, but like the Peace Corps, my God, you're a nurse. They'll take you in a hot minute.
Gotcha.
And they pay for everything. And you go live in a foreign country for 2 years, learn a new language. I mean, it's an amazing experience. I can't, in the 60s, when I first became aware of it, I couldn't join because I didn't have a bachelor's degree. And so I didn't qualify. Well, those things. And then, of course, later I had marriage and jobs and debts. And so, but when it finally came about, it was because both my husband and I were just burned out and bored. And we wanted a new adventure. And we were never committed to 2 years in the Peace Corps. We were committed to, well, let's go and check it out and see how it is. And because it's not like the military, you can always quit and go home.
Right. I was going to say, you could always say, no, I'm done.
Yeah, you can always say, well, this isn't working for me. And they'll put you on the next plane out of the country. And so, it's not a big deal.
That is nice.
But yeah, and I would do it again. People ask me if I would do it again. And I say, yes, I would, except that I've been there, done that. And now I have other things that I am exploring internally with just my own creativity.
Yes. And that's to me, that's amazing. All right. So share with the people where they can find you and connect with you, especially those courses sound amazing. So
thank you.
People where they can connect with you so that if they're looking and they're ready, because I know that a lot of people are looking for, help with that, because there are a lot of people that are like closet writers, maybe they were writers when they were in grade school or something. And then, and then, like you said, there was no support. Nobody was encouraging that. And as soon as you say, I want to be a writer, they're like, oh, you just want to be poor.
Or, oh, you can't do that. And a lot of people think they can't do that. They have a story they want to tell, but they've never written anything. And so anything that they wrote, any ad for a newspaper, any letter to a friend, that's all they discount. All that as not real writing.
Right.
Well, okay. Exactly. So back to your question. It's Carolyn V, as in Victory, Hamilton. And they can Google me and that everything will come up. I have a YouTube channel. And if they're at all anyone who's at all interested in the idea of memoir, come on over to Facebook and apply to join Aspiring Memoir Writers, the Facebook group.
I'm coming.
Aspiring Memoir Writers.
All right. That sounds amazing. Carolyn, thank you for coming and thank you for sharing all of your goodness and your wisdom. This has been powerful. And I'm just so excited, especially opening your mind. That is like a major thing because people don't even think that they can do that.
Yeah.
So they
don't even think they have a closed mind.
Right. They don't. They think, oh, well, I'm good and blah, 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 blah. But they're closed, because
I can't tell you how many of my friends, lifetime friends, who would say, oh, well, that's easy for you to do, but I could never do that.
Yeah.
If I had a dime for every time I've heard that, I'd be rich.
Yes. You and I both. That's what people say.
Open your mind and be willing to let stuff go.
Yes. It's because the thing is once you do that, it's like you're free.
Yeah.
I remember when I sold my house, I was like, whew.
Yeah.
It was like a freedom, I'm like, oh, people are like, well, I just want to get my house. And I'm like, child, I don't have to worry about when stuff breaks. I call somebody to fix it. I like that.
And people who worry about what their parents are going to think and what their children are going to think. Now, granted, my parents were gone after I wrote Coming to Las Vegas. So they never knew what a bad girl I was in Las Vegas. And that's a good thing. But the reality of it is I'm becoming more accustomed now to the idea that it doesn't matter what other people think about what I do or what I think. It only matters, and I don't consider myself a real religious person either, but it only matters what God thinks. And if God is okay with my behavior, and if God has sent me these learning experiences and I've actually learned something from them, then he's going to be okay with my crazy decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
And
Totally
you can
100%.
support me in some way in finding my true self and my true service and my true purpose in life. And I have to trust that.
Yes.
And what the guy down the street or my best girlfriend thinks doesn't matter.
And that's real. I mean, that is real. That's something I taught my kids. And I said the same thing because my mother used to say, because I would be like, Ma, they're talking about me. And as a kid, they're talking about me, blah, blah, blah. She said, well, are they taking care of you? No. Are they paying for you to buy anything or do anything? No. Then fuck them.
Amen to that.
And I've always remembered that because it's like, they're not doing anything for you. You don't need them. Then what do you care what they think? But anyway, all right. So thank you so much for joining me. This has been incredible. I have really loved it. And I mean, just all of the information and the empowerment, because I don't know if you realize, but you are empowerment. You are.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for your kind words of support. You've made my day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been
I'm going to go have a glass of wine and drink to you.
Do that because I got one more interview, so I can't drink wine yet. All right, my dear. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm so excited that you joined us. And for you that are watching or listening to us, thank you so much for doing so. And when you are ready to reach out to Miss Carolyn, if you are wanting to write your memoir or you're wanting to join her Facebook group, do connect with her and Google her. She is amazing. So again, thank you so much. Bye now.